Hello, everyone. It's really my pleasure to join you on VJ Hemonc today. And thank you very much, Sophie, for the invitation today to discuss our presentation at ASCO of the updates on the Phase III ICARIA trial. Just to remind everyone, and it's illustrated in this first slide, the ICARIA study was a randomized Phase III trial in patients with a median of 3 prior lines of therapy, so 2 to 4 were the eligibility criteria. The total size of the trial was actually over 307 patients, in fact, who received 2 or more prior therapies, including lenalidomide and a proteasome inhibitor. So they were 94% lenalidomide refractory, 77% proteasome inhibitor refractory, and importantly, almost 3/4 were double refractory. And we'd shown in this study that the combination of Isatuximab, Pomalidomide, and Dexamethasone proved superior to Pomalidomide and Dexamethasone with a hazard ratio of 0.596, with these hazard ratios sustained across both lenalidomide refractory, those patients lenalidomide refractory in last line, and importantly, and impressively for those who are double refractory compared to the gold standard at the time, which was obviously pomalidomide and dexamethasone. And this was reflected in the response rates that were seen. So at ASCO, we were able to demonstrate that with an update presented as a poster discussion and poster presentation, but with discussion slides, a look at PFS2 and overall survival, which were pre-specified endpoints. And in this study, we were able to demonstrate that the median progression-free survival, as defined as PFS2, was impressive, actually, at 17.5 months, compared to that for the PFS2 for pomalidomide and dexamethasone, which was 13 months. So what this refers to, from the point of randomization, not only to first progression, but to subsequent progression. And I think that's a critical point, because what it shows is there was no penalty to using the 3 drugs compared to the 2 earlier in the course of their relapsed refractory disease. And the p-value from this analysis was significant at 0.02, and the hazard ratio was obviously important at 0.759. So there was a significant improvement in PFS2 in favor of the 3 drugs compared to the 2. Now, how did this translate in terms of overall survival? Well, obviously in the relapsed refractory space, we're particularly excited that now we're starting to see survivals that can be very prolonged, even in this particularly vulnerable population. And actually, the data from the ICARIA trial really supported this. If you look at the Isatuximab, Pomalidomide, and Dexamethasone group, the median survival exceeded 24 months. It was actually 24.6 months, which obviously is solidly over 2 years and very encouraging in the relapsed refractory space. Median survival for the pomalidomide and dexamethasone patients also was good at 17.71 months, or 18 months in rounding out. But obviously the addition of the Isatuximab resulted in an approximate 6-month gain, slightly more in fact, 6-month, approaching 7-month gain in median overall survival. Now, this achieved a hazard ratio of 0.760 with a p-value of 0.028. Now, by pre-specified statistical analysis, the p-value that would generate statistical significance was 0.018. So we were just shy of that by virtue of statistical method. But I think clinically it's important to note that there really is a strong trend towards overall survival benefit, with a 7-month median overall survival gain demonstrated. So this clearly shows that the use of the 3-drug platform, and in particular the incorporation of an antibody in patients with 2 or more prior lines of therapy makes sense. And I think this was further supported by data from the Apollo trial, which showed in a less heavily pretreated population, 1 to 3 prior lines of therapy, a very similar PFS gain of approximately 6 months. But importantly, this was seen in patients who had received 1 to 3 prior lines of therapy. And that's, I think, a distinction between the ICARIA study and Apollo, and that it's worth bearing in mind. But nonetheless, the Apollo trial clearly supports that, the data that we've shown from ICARIA nicely, and there's clear there's clear resonance between the 2 trials, in my opinion, showing the benefit to bringing CD38 antibody targeting therapy into the relapse space with pomalidomide sooner rather than later. And I think that was further exemplified, certainly as far as Isatuximab is concerned, by data from IKEMA. Just to remind everyone, this original study led by Philippe Moreau and colleagues, really a landmark trial, in my opinion, generating a striking hazard ratio of 0.531 for relapsed refractory patients in favor of Isatuximab plus Carfilzomib and Dexamethasone. And I think what's particularly impressive to me is that the Carfilzomib and Dexamethasone arm of the study generated almost 20 months of median progression-free survival. Despite that very impressive performance, the combination of Isatuximab, Carfilzomib, and Dexamethasone clearly exceeded that. And in fact, the median has been not reached. And so the p-value for this analysis is highly significant at 0.0007. Now, at the ASCO meeting, we were very fortunate, I think, to get some important updates from colleagues of Philippe, Dr. Spitzka, Facon, and Hajek. And what they showed in separate subgroup analyses that were pre-specified is that the progression-free survival improvement seen with Isatuximab was particularly important in high-risk cytogenetics, defined as deletion 17p, 414, and 1416, and depth and of response and PFS improved. What I think practically from a clinical point of view is particularly important to note is that 1Q amplified patients also in this category did particularly well. So that, I think, is an important observation, and that was presented by Ivan Spitzka. Thierry Facon presented in the older patient population, how did the addition of Isatuximab perform? This is very relevant because obviously Carfilzomib is not necessarily our first choice of PI in older patients, given some of the vascular toxicities associated with its use. But having said that, in selected patients, it can be obviously administered, and this trial clearly shows that. And what you saw here was an improved PFS that was really quite dramatic, actually, with a hazard ratio of 0.364 in favor of the antibody plus the Carfilzomib platform over just Carfilzomib and Dexamethasone alone. And what I think was particularly impressive from Thierry's analysis was treatment proved tolerable, and there were no excess of serious treatment emergent adverse events. So this was, I think, a critical aspect of the presentation from Thierry and the subgroup analysis from IKEMA. And then last but no means least, Roman Hajek presented PFS benefits seen with the addition of Isatuximab, regardless of the refractoriness of the patient or the number of prior treatment lines. So again, a very important observation from a large phase 3. So all in all, Sophie, I think what we're seeing is continuing important information from Isatuximab combined with backbone agents in the relapsed refractory setting on the first hand with Pomalidomide, and on the second hand with Carfilzomib.